All right, welcome to another episode of My Good Friends. We are in season 2, people. Season 2, back at you. In the midst of quarantine, we have Tina with me as per usual.
Hello.
Tina, say hello. And then we have
Hello.
Nate, co-host several times last time. He is back in the house. Nate Strogren.
Yes, for season dose.
Our Viking guest host. Dose season. And then we have a very special guest. We always do the with special guest. I mean, I don't know. It sounds like he's an interesting man, the most interesting man I know.
Man of mystery.
World. Man of mystery.
Isn't that the hero's journey?
Shane Sevo is with us. He is in his basement, which is nice for my entire house.
Responsibly home sheltering from Livonia in the bunker.
People don't know where Livonia is, but it's all right.
Livonia,
they don't need to. They don't need to. It's a beautiful place. It's a beautiful place.
Magical,
really. So, let's see. This has been an interesting 2020 so far, and I hadn't felt any energy towards doing season 2, and then all of a sudden it was like, all right, I guess we're all stuck in like locations, so let's put some stuff together and get it out to people who are probably desperate for a little consumption of some content. And before this all happened, give you a little backdrop. Shane invited us out. Tina, you didn't get the invite, but next time you will. But Nate and I and a few other people to his house.
I'm sorry, to see the garage.
Oh, the garage.
The garage is spectacular.
My pride and joy.
Yeah, Shane is a bachelor, and his garage is amazing.
I always introduce it as the only thing I've ever done right in my life, and it shows.
Wow.
I mean, completely right. You know, like
completely right.
Usually you miss something, but this one, we're at 95% satisfaction.
It's unbelievable. And he's not joking, people. I did see it, and it was ridiculous on multiple levels. But Shane took us through, I'll let him give a background, but he took us through the hero's journey. So Joseph Campbell's work, and Joe Cams, as I like to call him. And you may have never heard of it, so you may not even know what it is, but we're gonna give you. Shane's gonna give us a little like intro tour. At least he doesn't know this yet, but I'm asking him to. So he's gonna give us a little tour, and then we're gonna talk about how it applies to business and life, and I'm sure we'll have lots to talk about. So, without further ado, Shane, why don't you kind of like tell us a little bit about how you got into this?
Sure. Yeah.
And maybe what do you do? Like, what do you do for a living? Like, give us a little background.
What is my occupation? So, and I'm fortunate that I have an occupation that can be relocated to remote destinations. I work for a marketing agency called Symmetry, and we make a lot of websites. We send a lot of emails, and and related activities. But yeah, so I'm working from home and doing the same thing that I would normally do, but just without the pleasure of immediate coworkers to harass. So,
which is a bummer. We all need those.
Yeah. So you want me to roll into part 2 of your question? What was it? An introduction?
Yeah, how did you get into the hero's journey? How did you do some studying into this? And then what have you done? Kind of give people a background.
Sure. So, and I have to preface everything. Like, this is, quite momentous how the universe aligns. I think tomorrow is Joseph Campbell's birthday.
Oh, really?
It is.
We'll release it on the birthday.
Kaboom.
So when you hear this, it's his birthday, just so everybody knows.
Happy birthday, Joko.
Joe Cams.
Joe Cams.
Oh, Joe Cams.
Not Joko.
Yeah, Joe Cam was not one of the Foundation's official titles for him, I don't think, but I like it.
I got that from Pete Holmes, actually. I stole it from Pete Holmes. So I can't take credit, really.
Yeah, that figures.
I'm sorry.
If things were going according to plan in the world, and there wasn't a pandemic holding us all in permanent lockdown right now, I would be. And you don't need to visualize this, but I would be naked on the coast of California, staring out into the ocean at the Esalen Institute, which was where Joe Cam, that was his favorite hangout place. And so he spent a lot of time there hanging out with other people like Aldous Huxley and like Alan Watts and those kind of folks that would all kind of gather at this kind of like a spiritual research center of sorts. And it was on an old Indian ground. But so that's where I had last year a personal hero's journey out to this as a destination. And the Joseph Campbell Foundation does a week-long workshop every year in honor of Joseph Campbell. And it kind of started as a memorial for his around his birthday. They did 1 week leading up to it. So
and
that's
you were planning to be there.
Yeah, I had. Yeah, my plane ticket hopefully will still work in 2021, but as of now,
well, hopefully it's still there. Hopefully we're still there, and then maybe it'll happen.
This could be the end. Yeah, I should just enjoy it. You're
you
right.
Don't know. You don't know.
I just jump back to the one thing is like, why do you have to be naked? What?
Wait, he said don't visualize it.
It's not
okay, all right, cool. Because I was like, is there like I don't know that Joseph Campbell, in my experience, the naked piece of that.
It's part of the experience.
Really
just embrace it.
Okay.
No, they have these wonderful hot springs right on the ocean. And so that's part of the experience of like this holistic spiritual center. And there actually is like a lot of coincidental, like, yeah, it's something that happens. And
coincidental nudity, is that a new hashtag? Like, what?
Is that a thing? Yeah, hashtag coincidental.
I mean, if you're going to, if you're going to enter into full vulnerability, you might as well start by shedding your clothing. And this is how
it's the next logical step.
Yeah, no, I think there's something to it, and that was part of the experience. But anyway, so going back, maybe I don't know. But 15, 20 years or so, like my gateway into Joseph Campbell and his work was my involvement in the independent film community. And as soon as I started getting into film and the storytelling process and what it took to structure a story, like he just became this, monumental figure that everyone referenced, and you pretty quickly figure out that, the Star Wars films were built around it, and you learn that George and Joe started hanging out, and they were Joseph Campbell had a lot of influence on Lucas. And so early in, I'd say like my mid-20s is kind of where I was like first peeked to this figure in history as a mythologist. And initially started studying his work as a kind of a practical guide for how you tell a story. And so that was kind of the beginning of it.
So why don't you take us through, like in a abbreviated version, but take us through the circle of like the hero's journey so people can understand a little bit of like what we're talking about.
Yeah, so it does oftentimes get represented in a circular pattern. And so that was something that I presented at our time when we got together, and just kind of the circular nature of life and habit and the experience of life from many mythological perspectives and religious perspectives usually has some sort of circular symbol to it. So mandalas are often presented in a circular pattern to try to make sense of life. And the hero's journey is one of those sorts of tools that is also put around a narrative structure. So there's typically it's presented as three phases. that they refer to as a separation, an initiation, and a return. And you could think of it in just kind of two dimensions, as a departure from a place of safety, a transformation, and a return back from to where you came, but you're now a new person. And so this process is kind of the quintessential story architecture that pretty much all mythology is built around, that has a central character. And most stories that we care about do. So there's often 17 stages presented, and I think that's typically how Campbell framed it. But so in the separation stage, so from a place of safety, you have a call to adventure. And usually there's a refusal of the call. So stage 2 is, no, I see this thing that I am being invited to do, and no, I'd rather not do it. And then often there is some sort of supernatural aid that pushes you out of your comfort zone. So now you're forced into it. And then there's a crossing the threshold into a new world and a new experience. And so now you're out of the known world and you're crossing into the unknown world. Then a belly of the whale experience, where this is the no going back. Now you're in it and you have to deal with it. Then a road of trials, which is oftentimes dramatized over and over again right there. You can expand the road of trials indefinitely. But this is where you're building skills and artifices on top of this is where oftentimes the persona of a person is developed along the road of trials. And the meeting with the goddess, oftentimes in story structures, there's a moment where you're given kind of a beatific vision of what you're going after. And so now you have a lot of skills, and now you're given like a focal reason to go after this. And then a temptation that often is coupled with that. There's the shadow side of the beatific vision, the temptation of staying in that moment. It could be, a temptation from another person or a situation. And then atonement, which often is rephrased by phenomes to be at one-ment. And so now you're united with your mission, and you and it are the same thing. And then the apostasis, which would be the fall. And so it's not quite a crucifixion, but it could be. That's usually where the crucifixion would happen. So you know what your mission is, and then the apostasis is a recognition that you must die in order or someone's going to have to die in order to get through this. And then the ultimate boon is on the other side of that fall and that self-emptying. When you're fully depleted, you are able to grasp the perfect object to retrieve. This is usually a metaphysical exchange here, where you may have been sent out to capture a particular physical object, but then you realize that it actually doesn't exist, and you get a piece of information that changes you. And the thing that you have to bring back, this ultimate boon, is something transcendent that has been created in the process of your own story. In that moment, there's kind of another rapturous moment where there's a refusal to return. Oftentimes the hero is like, why can't I just stay now that I have this new knowledge of myself or of the universe or of God? I will just stay with it. And again, there's a kind of sometimes there's an outside push that throws the hero back towards a return trip, and you're pushed back. Sometimes I call it a magic flight. And then this can get turbulent on the way in, and you need another rescue. You don't know how to get back on your own, and you need someone else to guide you that's outside of yourself. And then there's a return crossing of the threshold back into a known world that you left. And as you cross that threshold, you then become the master of two worlds. The known and the unknown are now united in you. And whenever this happens, it results in a new freedom to live and new ways of being and living that were foreign to you before you started the journey. So that would be kind of the traditional tour of the hero's journey in a quick anthology.
So basically like Star Wars, exactly.
Yeah. And so that was George Lucas's whole thing was I had all these characters and ideas, and I had no idea how to fit them all together. I didn't, I had a bunch of situations that I thought would be, cool and interesting, and I had characters that I've been thinking about, but I needed a map to put them to. And when he read The Hero with 1,000 Faces and Joseph Campbell's work, he was like, okay, this is my map. I can work with this, and this is describing every other story structure. The trials of Odysseus would be very similar as well. You could map those onto it.
Yeah, so many,
perfectly.
Right?
Yeah,
but the three main are the call, like just so it's a little clearer. Because 17 steps a lot, but it was helpful.
Yeah.
It's a call to an adventure, right? Is that the first one?
Yeah, that's usually the first step of separation. Is
the three main phases are what then? What's the three kind of overarching?
So they usually put them as separation, initiation, and return. And so the initiation is 2/3 of the experience, and you're being initiated into your new life.
And then the return part, I've heard you reference before. The importance of the return is that you're bringing back this new knowledge or this new wisdom to your community.
Yeah, that's right. So the boon is always to be shared with the community. So, one of the great things about it, from like a sociological tool, like the hero's journey, I feel answers a lot of questions around the relationship between individuals and communities. And it's not about obliterating either of them. It's about accepting both of them as constituent components of being a human, that you always have a community, and you have a responsibility to your community, but you are also an individual. And if you don't leave the community in the safety of it, in many situations, you don't develop your full self. You don't fully individuate. But when you do that, it's not to abandon your community, it's to return back as your new self and reinitiate that process for someone else. You become Obi-Wan for the next departure.
Padawan. The next Padawan.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think that's a beautiful piece of it that, solves, I think, a lot of the problems that we have in modern culture of the glorification of the individual, but also the global responsibility. I mean, we're experiencing that right now. Like, we are all in a situation of global responsibility to each other.
But the unknown, right?
Yeah. And we've entered into a new space that we're trying to figure out. And so, it can be used in that way as well as a kind of, if you think of mankind as a global community, global organism, we've been participating in the hero's journey as a single entity of humanity over and over again. Every time we expand our understanding of what it is to be human, we've gone through that cycle, and we bring it back to ourselves and try to figure out how to reshare that. And that's what stories do. They're the most transmittable return boon to give, is to sit down and tell that story.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. It's what the first episode we just did was, I told the story of my India trip. Actually just got posted this morning, or posted this a few hours ago. But yeah, it was basically the same thing as like going through this trial, this terrible thing, getting knowledge out of it, right? And then coming back to the tribe and telling the story, and maybe someone else will get, learning from it. It's very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And if we don't do that, we feel incomplete. And, and I've shared that with some of my local community and my local spiritual community, that was something that was becoming a stronger awareness in me over the last 5 years, that was a missing part of my journey. Like, that was something I needed to figure out how to enact. And my engagement with the material and the Campbell Foundation, really helped me to admit that, and gave me some tools to see it as part of my life. So there's a lot of crossover. Campbell and Carl Jung used to share notes, and all these mythic archetypes are things that have a lot of resonance between each other. And I've seen anecdotally that, like, a lot of therapists try to use kind of personal narrative as a personal transformative tool, and I've experienced that to some degree myself.
Mm. All right, what do you want to take it from here? Come on, gang.
Well, I was going to bring up, so years ago, and when I was working with Ben, I went to a marketing conference for healthcare, and one of the presentations was a guy from an ad agency who used the hero's journey to recraft their storytelling for their advertising for a healthcare client. And because they'd realized that all of the hospital advertising was continually casting the doctor in the role of the hero. And what did it look like to shift that story that the patient is the hero? So I think like that to me was like very interesting, because if you like, that's a shift in perspective, right? From someone outside of me is controlling my story, and I'm the person controlling my story. Yeah. When I came back to Ben and we tried to figure out who the hero of Revenue Cycle was.
Yeah, we did. It was tough, really actually. It was tough.
Like, who?
I think we landed on the employees. I think we landed on the employees, really, the staff. Like,
yeah, I think that's good. And stories are always hard won, and I feel that your story is often one of the most valuable things that you have, right? So, but it's hard to tell. Storytelling is an art form that most people don't get a lot of practice with. But I think everyone's personal story, is the most valuable, interesting thing about them. And then that goes to kind of what you were presenting as, giving that to a patient as a tool to understand that, this is something that you're about to go through, could be really helpful.
Yeah, I think Tina's point, I think for forever, healthcare has kind of positioned the doctor as the hero. And in reality, they're probably just the guide. in the hero's journey, they're part of they're not the hero. Like, yeah, they're doing great work, but everyone's a part of that. Everyone's their own. The patient's the hero going through their own journey, their own process. And hopefully the physician is a guide along it, in a good way and not a bad way.
Right. Yeah, it's all about perspective.
Flipping it. Flipping it for them, because they always see themselves as like, what are the heroes? Right. Wow, come on.
Yeah, because everybody is experiencing their own cycle, and then sometimes they line up and you have like team resonance where everyone can feel it together, but usually they're a little bit disjointed, the characters, and you might play one of those characters in someone else's story, right? But you don't always get to see it. In a similar fashion, like once I had spent some time with the material and it was fresh, like I got back to my work life and did a lunch and learn presentation and walked our team through it. And what I used as kind of the paradigm was we experience the project, right? So every time we respond to an RFP, it's the beginning of the process. Like, it's an invitation to do this as a team. And the hero stories often do have, like the Lord of the Rings or something like that, you have a collection of characters that go together. And then each person, you could retell the story from their perspective, and they would all have their own hero's journey. Usually when we tell it, there's one person that's a central character. It's just easier for us to think about it that way, and identify with that universal character. But yeah, if you go through, for us, when we go through a project, mapping it through, it's like every one of those phases has a resonance for different people in that process. And you're going to repeat it. We're going to do another project as soon as this one is done. And the goal is always to take the lessons learned from the last one. Like, the gold gets, like, we get the money, we do the project, but what the team really cares about is what type of transformation have we experienced together about the way we live and do work now? Like, can we bring something from this to the next adventure? And if you don't get that, then it is kind of just an endless slog. But if you get that boon and you're able to change and improve and iterate, the next one can be adventurous as well.
It gets interesting. I've been thinking more about this as like an entrepreneur or entrepreneurs, right? Like, so much of like what, if I was honest about where I'm at right now, it's like, it feels like you're in the desert or in the middle of the process.
The belly of the whale? Are you in the belly of the whale?
The belly of the whale. Because, you go as an entrepreneur, you go on this like unknown step into an adventure, like starting something, right? And you can see why there's like serial entrepreneurs. I think you can almost see like, I was listening to Gary Vee today, and Gary Vaynerchuk, for those who don't know, and he was talking about like, he just loves the process. It's like the end goal, like, is almost like hitting the end and like reaching whatever. He's like, I know it doesn't make me happy, because what makes me happy is the whole process. Now he's definitely self-aware, like more probably than most people, but it's interesting, like being in the middle of that and feeling like, almost questioning, like, why am I doing this? Like, who, like I was talking to Brian, our friend who's a photographer, and he's like, they said it'd be fun, start a business. They said it'd be easy. He's like, I don't have a client booked for like any time in the next few months, So it's just one of those things that's very interesting, kind of being in the middle of it and watching it as a business person, entrepreneur, trying to start your own thing, and it's exciting, but the reality is so much harder in the middle of it, because the process is like challenging. And
sure.
I think people, I don't know, Tina and I talked about kind of Brene Brown's new podcast, and she had, I can't remember the woman's name, but she had a woman on there that was started the Me Too movement. When she started the Me Too movement? In 2006. Yeah. And it was in basements of churches with young girls who had been sexually abused. And it caught, it caught fire in 2018, like 19, right. Like that's 13 years in the making of working and working and working and working. And I just found that fascinating. Is like, that's so true. It's like for us people, someone asked me a couple weeks ago, it was like, well, what's your secret sauce? And I'm like, secret sauce? Are you out of your mind? I go, dude, there's no secret sauce, man. It's like, I've been working at this, like, blood, sweat, and tears. And several times where you're like, oh, this isn't going to work. Right.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting, kind of like, as I left your house a couple weeks ago, but then as we've been talking about it, is like, that seems like very interesting in the business world, especially for entrepreneurs, like having to go through that cycle often.
Yeah. The other part that I thought when you were talking about teams and just for those of us that lead teams and having that, you referenced it as like the ultimate boon that the team shares that. And then it can help into the next project, into the next invitation. And it just, for whatever reason, when you were saying it, it helped me understand as a leader of teams that deeply cares for people, why it hurts me so much when I lose a team member. And whether that's somebody who steps away or it's somebody that has to be let go, it just gave me a different perspective about that. Of like, I know that people always talk about how much it costs to onboard a new team member, but the loss of having that previous experience together and being able to share the ultimate, boon together, the learning, the wisdom, like that's just gone. And then you're starting over with a new person, and you're stepping into that new challenge together, and you'll have that experience. But I don't know, it was hitting me in a different way than I had heard it before.
Do you think that's like, Nate, a, is that like when someone's, it's almost like, I always have this weird feeling when someone joins, like when we started Health Drives, we started a company, and when people joined like 6 months later, it was like they were almost like the outsiders, like, oh, I got to catch them up on, like, they weren't here when we did this. And is it almost like that, but the opposite, like they weren't.
I don't know that it's even the opposite. It might just be, and also that.
Because they didn't have the same experiences, so you have to like manufacture the experience.
Mm-hmm. Or it's almost like you're hitting reset with your team every time someone because the dynamics of the way that this set is going to go through this invitation and it's learning and then bringing it back. Like, if part of that leaves, now you don't have a collective knowledge. You might be able to tell them what you learned, but they didn't experience it. And so I think that there is that piece of telling the story is super important, because people are able to, they're able to hear the learning. You're not able to recreate any experiences for them. And so I think in the sense of team leading, I might tell new team members why we came to this understanding or what we learned, but I'm probably going to end up going through that same journey with them again, because they haven't experienced it. They just heard it as either as a best practice or as a piece of the vision or values. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the shared experience is super valuable. I think one thing that we've learned is that if you build a ritual around something, you can encapsulate it in a kind of digestible moment. So like from a religious perspective, like if we did the Stations of the Cross together, you would do the hero's journey,
right,
as a little community, and you'd be like, oh, okay, this is what life is about. And we just walked through it together, and we all admitted each of these stages are real. And, then you have that metaphor to think about what's really going on in the rest of your life.
That's good.
It was made me think of the time Tina was in this at Health Rise. Our old company, we had I just had a really bad thing happen. and we had to lay off like 17 people, like right before Christmas. Yeah. And I just remember kind of like, the loss of that, and trying to like you just lost not just team. Imagine like out of 60, 70 people we lost, and we ended up losing like 24, 25 people. We had like more than a quarter of our staff, like a third of our staff. And just feeling that kind of like, oh yeah, that person had this experience. We had these experiences, and now it's like starting. It's like they're not here, so you got to like figure out. That was really hard. I don't know why. I don't know if that has to do with the hero's journey, but I just feel like that was already.
Well, it does. I think wherever you experience a significant loss that affects you personally, I mean, that's the component where you shed your artifice. So like the road of trials on the way in, like the motif is usually building up skills and techniques and processes in order to grapple with life. And so we're experiencing that now. Like, the world had built a very intricate collection of economic feedback loops that sustained us. We had this very complicated machine that we've built, and now there's a undeniable tragedy that unwinds the whole thing. And so that would be, that self-emptying moment where all of these tools that we had kind of embedded inside of us now no longer sustain us, and we have to let that go. So
something has to die.
Something has to die, and that is where all of the transformation actually occurs. Without it, you're just building a more and more complicated machine that you never really learn anything new.
I was just on this. I'm going to say this. This is maybe not being popular with my listeners, but
You're always saying things that are not popular with listeners.
I know, but people listen, so we'll see. Well, I was on this, like, I'm not going to say exactly who it was, but I was on this like webinar thing that someone was hosting, and they had like 3 people on it, and these 3 people were just like, I don't know how to. I don't know if it was honest or if they were like, but they were so uber positive about the opportunities this presents, and I was just like, "Are you really like
this being the virus?"
Yeah, that like, okay. Oh, I mean, you got to stay like. I'm doubling down. I'm investing in the market. I'm like, whoa, like, okay, like, are you like, can't it just be okay right now to like. It almost felt like so. I'm almost like so sick of the link and link. I'm on LinkedIn a lot. Obviously, LinkedIn's like kind of my thing, but I'm sure it's somewhere other places. But on LinkedIn, it's like it's almost all positive. Like, take advantage of the opportunity, keep your head up. Like, you got to keep. And I'm just like really, people? Like, right. Is no one going to be honest about the fact that like I just lost half my business, or other people have lost everything? Like that. It's almost like don't take a moment to like to acknowledge the fact that a bunch of stuff is going to die, not just not people. I'm not trying to be insensitive, and there's like stuff like as in like you just said, our process systems, companies, revenue, people's livelihoods, they're going to start over. Yeah, I don't know. It just all felt like I don't know how disingenuous is the right word, but it just rubbed me the wrong way. I don't know why, but maybe because I'm sensitive to it right now.
Yeah, well, and that's, I mean, entrepreneurship has the resiliency is the fail forward approach, right? Like you accept failure as part of the process, and that gives you some of your resiliency. It could also make you kind of crass in how you appraise failure, but it's a coping mechanism. I mean, that's another artifice.
That's true. Right.
That when you get truly emptied, that will fail you as well, and so that hole there, and actually, like if you draw this as a circle that apostasis or apostasis, I mean, that should actually be a break in the story. It actually feels like it ended.
Say some more detail about that. What do you mean, like a break?
Number is that?
Well,
So a death.
I'm assuming it's in the middle somewhere where it's the part of the process.
Yeah, I mean, a death is an end, and if you enter into a death with the belief that everything's going to be okay, you're not actually experiencing it. It has to be a rupture of your story. And we see this all the time in movies, and the all is lost moment where it's like the thing that we thought was going to save us after we already failed. This was the last Hail Mary, and this has failed as well. And that moment of finally having no hope, it is a real moment, and it feels like the end of your story. And it feels like a literal death, even if it's not. Like whatever I am no longer exists, and that can be interminably long. And the emotional impact of that, could outlast lifetimes. But it will make a new revelation possible and a new resurrection possible. But it may not even be experienced by those people that entered into that death. And so, I think there is some honor that needs to be given to that, as in terms of how significant it feels.
I think that's a really important piece. And I think in relation to what you were saying, Ben, about LinkedIn, is there does seem to be like a missing element of acknowledgement. I mean, that's the connection I'm trying to make. Like acknowledging, like, this is tough and this really sucks, or what, you know what I mean? Like, it is too much of a sunshiny, like, it's all going to be okay. And honestly, I live in the it's all going to be okay world. And even for me, like, I do. I'm like, we're gonna make this happen. We're gonna get through it. You're parked there.
Yep.
It's where I roll. But even for me, listening, like, that kind of people, like, this isn't, it grates on me a little, because I think there's a certain amount of integrity I do have around what I do. Like right now, I would and have helped out my clients, in things that are not, contractually, whatever. I don't care. Like, you need me to send out a COVID message for you? Like, let's get that together. Let's do it. I don't nitpick those kinds of things. It's not the way that I do business. But when I tell people that I don't do that, they're like, you should be billing that. I'm like, I'm not going to bill that. I'm not going to profit from this moment in time. Like that just isn't for me. But I agree with you. I think there is like this there's a place between the gloom and doom and the sunshine where I think we could just really like acknowledge and take that intermission that Shane was mentioning. I don't think you called it an intermission, but that's what I turned it into in my head. The break, but
intermission. I like intermission.
I call it an intermission.
Someone's like, okay, there's two of them.
Right. So there's going to be an intermission. It's halftime for those of you who prefer that. It's halftime, everybody. But I do think, to me, that's kind of what it feels like. It's an interesting break from that I think we're going to look back and see, like, this is a moment when like when Ben talks about his Kairos moments, like, this is going to be a moment where things changed, right? But while we're in it, it's kind of hard to acknowledge it, maybe. I don't know.
But I think Shane, it's not hard to acknowledge it. People don't want to acknowledge it.
Right.
Because they don't want to acknowledge the fact that something has died, or their own ended. Thing is falling apart.
Right.
Right? Like, or has to change. I mean, I get that.
So what would the meeting with the goddess be in this scenario that we're talking about?
I assume we're talking about me. I'm the only one here.
Well, of course. Right? I mean, it's meeting with Tina, the sage. She's like the...
Here I am.
COVID-19. Everything's failing.
What's the lady in the Matrix? I can't remember.
Ben lost half his business. He's on an intermission. So then...
He's going to get some popcorn and enjoy it.
Yeah, the way that circle keeps turning is the meeting with the goddess, right?
Oh, what's
Yeah,
that?
so usually that is presented like after the road of trials. So like you're already pretty beat down and you've been slogging away for quite some time, and you're probably a little bit jaded, and you have some techniques that work, but they're a little bit.
I'm not jaded, but other people are.
Yeah.
Other people are, Shane. I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm saying you as in the royal you. That's also me and everyone else.
Yeah, I know. I get you.
You know what I'm saying. But you have your techniques and your ways of things that work for you, but you've become hardened, and you also don't know what you're doing anymore. You don't know why you're doing it. You just do it because that's survival, and you're climbing over one failure after another and just figuring out a way to climb out of each pit. And so you're kind of at there's a danger of turning into a mechanized creature. And the meeting with the goddess is a chance to regain a more beautiful vision of what life could be. And it doesn't involve just you killing monsters. Mm-hmm. There's something more sensitive and valuable about your journey that a person or an experience is going to hint to you about. You're going to be reminded of that potentiality. So like in our current experience, I mean, I think we're starting to, we're already admitting that the feelings of communal support, I think, are the beginning of that. The acknowledgement of the interconnectedness is the only way through. Mm-hmm. And that starts to...
The fact that everyone is using Zoom.
Yeah, well, Zoom is doing pretty good right now from a marketing perspective.
They're like, we're going to make some cash on this virus. Sorry. Exactly. Sorry, Tina. Didn't mean to offend you.
No, he's killing it.
No, I'm sure some people are doing really well in a paradoxical turn of events, but no, I think there is a new sense of a vision for is humanity about a competitive global game of domination of country on top of country. I think Nate, you and I actually talked about this as like the movie plot to Spider-Man, the last Spider-Man, where there's like an orchestrated outside threat that brings everyone together. And this in some ways is that foreign invader that we all, it has that apocalyptic sci-fi movie experience of, how do we beat this thing? And it reminds us of our most cherished asset is not our ability as individuals to survive, but as a global community to survive.
Heard.
but harder said than done from the subterranean bunkers.
Yeah.
But it'll be fascinating in 6 months if we all get back together on Zoom to talk about what.
Hopefully in person.
Jesus. I think we can do it. I think we can do it on Zoom.
I thought he meant Shane.
Being hopeful.
I'm saying we get back together on Zoom as a way of marking this moment, remembering it.
Oh, right.
And then we're able to come back and just say, oh, hey, here's the boon. Here's what I learned in the last 6 months, out of this, and to be able to share, to bring it back to the community of listeners or whoever participates in this.
Yeah, right.
I do. I think as a leader of people, as a shepherd, being able to be vulnerable in the real time situations is crucial. Because most people aren't looking for someone who's going to say everything's going to go back to normal, and by golly, it'll all go back to normal on Easter, because that's a really important day. Important for me. I don't think anyone wants to hear that. I think what we want to hear is, I don't know what's going on. Here's what I know. I know that on the other side of this, we're not going to be the same. And so, like, to me, it's like that's the meeting with the goddess, where it's like, if we make it through this, we're going to be different. We're going to function differently. We're going to interact differently. Our conversations are going to be different. Our priorities are going to be different. And I think it would be a shame if we went back to the exact same lives that we had,
right?
On April 14th or whenever that is.
Hopefully, it's April 14th. I've always been fascinated with World War II, and I just got a chance to go again to World War II Museum in New Orleans. End of February, Tina and I were in New Orleans checking out hotels for our next event. Hopefully, it will happen in the fall. But I took my friend Doug with me, and anyway, so we were in there, and kind of you get to walk through. If anyone's ever been, it's incredible, and you get to kind of, I think, experience what it was like as best you can. But what's fascinating about that is like about like how many, most basically everybody was a volunteer. They did a draft, but people were volunteering, and people are committing suicide over not being able to join the army because they, for whatever reason, medically couldn't make, whatever. People, that was a real thing. Like, and you think about like how much that's changed, like how much has changed. So it's just interesting to see something, it's like a resetting, like Nate was saying, like a resetting of everything. Just think about even just how we have been so politically divided, like split, like almost as a country split right down the middle, us, them. And I hope, you wonder and you hope that, as terrible as this is, that it could actually hopefully bring people back to some semblance of like, we're all people and we're a community, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Part of the hero
you mentioned, go ahead.
Oops, I'm sorry, that I don't think Shane touched on was that, and I only know this basically because I watched The Power of Myth, the first episode today. So disclosure, I didn't get it out of my brain because I took notes. But part of it is the fact that the purpose of the hero's journey is actually to get you out of your own ego, right? And to that place of community, right? You maybe said that, Shane, but didn't use those words. And I think what we're going to see, to Nate's comment, is that at the start of this, it was all like me, right? The toilet paper craze. Somebody please explain, but whatever. And I think we're now slowly seeing that shift. And a lot of the messaging is all in that, like, you don't stay home for yourself, you're staying home for others. Like, right. So where the focus is really coming off the individual and to the community. So I do hope that that's the change, that lingers, that stays with us, is learning that it's not, that you don't need 24 rolls of toilet paper right now. By the way, the shelves are still empty. It was just at the store.
They are. I was just at the store tonight, and they're empty.
Yeah.
I think the Power of Myth episode 2 addresses the toilet paper.
The toilet paper crisis. Yes, exactly.
Of
course it does. Of course,
the toilet paper arc myth.
Right.
If you build it, we will survive.
Yeah.
But no, I think that's a great commentary, and I think we've been talking around and about that. But yeah, just that idea of, so on the ego creation, as you do the road of trials, and this is one of those like inevitable things that, maybe there's a few really special people that can sidestep it, but most of us generate an ego in order to deal with life. and it's a natural process that is part of the journey. Like,
right.
You are going to develop a persona and a presence to deal with all of the different struggles and challenges that are put at you. And then this culminating moment that we've been circling around, and most stories do kind of center on that ultimate death and loss. That's where the ego gets destroyed. And and that also has to happen. Like, you had to build something in order to give it up. And the more embedded you become with the thing, the more excruciating the separation is. And that's the drama of our stories that we love. I mean, take like an Iron Man character, like, it's actually embedded in him, and his artifice is him. Like, you can't separate the two, but in the end, like, what the story is about is his humanity, not his superpowered gizmos. But it takes a lot of energy because he's put so much energy into building that, to separate him from it.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, Shane, thank you so much for enlightening us with the hero's journey. I thought it was great. Thanks for being a guest. And Nate, thanks again for joining us.
No problem.
As a host.
Can I give some random shout outs? Is there a place for that?
Sure. I mean, we can do anything we want.
Like a credit roll? Like a credit roll?
Who are we thinking?
I want to throw some shout outs to Robert Walter, Tyler, Steve, and Jimmy that made my experience at the from the JCF Foundation, that made my hero's journey experience out in Cali so great. And a local who was on one of the directors, Laura Cahill, is a local Detroit podcaster, Brave by Design and Force of Badassery, and she helped facilitate that experience, and it was wonderful, and I owe them a lot for it. And my Rolf One bunkmates, Kevin, Mark, and Jacob. Peace.
Awesome. And if Shane, if people want to get more information, what book should they read, and then where can they find out about going on the retreat naked?
Yes.
Coincidentally naked.
Hashtag coincidentally naked.
I mean, you don't have to, but it just happened. It might happen.
This is going to be
Sometimes
trending,
these things
happen.
Well, you'll have to wait till next year, since COVID shut down the retreat center. I think they were still going, but I mean, that retreat was canceled. So next year in March, last week of March, you'd be able to do that at Esalen in California in Big Sur.
Okay.
And so as far as like other material, like we've been mentioning the Power of Myth, and I think the interview format of that with Bill Moyers, I think, really draws out a lot of it through conversation. Like, the writing can be pretty dense, and I think there's even some like hijacked YouTube videos of it.
And that's on YouTube, I think, right?
And it's,
yeah,
I think it's out there.
Amazon Prime. You buy the whole thing for
$12.
No?
Yeah, people buy it. Buy it, people.
Buy it.
Right.
Well, I would have gone to the library to get it, but I can't.
Yeah, you can't. Oh, not good.
Buy it so that those Amazon employees can get some catastrophe pay.
Catastrophe pay.
Yes.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. And we'll talk in 6 months and do a follow-up. Hopefully we're all here and maybe in person. Maybe we'll be in person. It'd be awesome.
I'd be down.
All right.
Thanks, Shane.
Thank you for the opportunity. It was really fun. Appreciate it.